Welcome to, gotta pull my notes apart. Legal matters, matters. Advisors, company structure, and boards, creating a network of believers and supporters. 3 of our 5 panelists are attorneys, and 2 who are not attorneys. I won't start any attorney jokes. We had an elephant in the last one, though. So anyway, their bios are in the handout you received. Please, you'll be receiving survey handouts to give us feedback after every one of these presentations. And then we will be pulling one of these for a free membership this evening at the end of the session. And if you are not here, we will notify you. And if you do join, we will have already joined, we will refund your membership payment. So here's what we're covering today. Every business operates under constraints of local, state, federal, and international laws and regulations. While you focus on your daily activities, you must rely on the help of others to protect and guide you. This panel will help you understand how to select your friends and partners, and our moderator this afternoon will be Harry. Take it away, Harry.
All right, hi everybody, I'm Harry, a rater with BioSTL. So here's how we're going to do things today. We've divided the presentation into 2 sections. So the first section we're going to talk about legal formation, and what's going to happen is on each of these, one of the panel members is going to cover just a couple minutes, and then the rest of the panel will chime in just sort of ad hoc. And then we're going to try to leave 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of each section. So there'll be 2 Q&A sections. So the first section is going to be from the lawyers. You're going to hear from them first. And Tim is going to cover legal formation. And then Marqueta is going to cover the issues in terms of getting registered in your locality. And then Brian, sitting here to my right, is going to cover governance. And then we'll have a break for Q&A, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about team formation, which Bob is going to lead off. I'm going to sort of kibitz from the sideline. So I'm going to just ask the panel to, our bios are basically in the materials you have, so we're not going to cover that, but I wanted each panel member to give you a sense of what their core of their practice is. So, I run a coaching and resources program for life science companies in St. Louis, and anybody that has a patentable technology and plans to build their business in St. Louis should come and see me. So, Brian?
Hi, I'm Brian Rogers. I'm an attorney, one of the majority here on the panel, I'm proud to say. I'm a sole practitioner. The name of my firm is Blue Maven Law, and I focus mainly on helping buyers and sellers and banks in transactions where people are buying or selling small businesses, but also help new companies get set up and do contracts and just kind of general business law stuff.
Hi, I'm Bob Cockrell. I'm a partner in Exeter Group. We're a venture development firm. We identify technologies that look like they have promise and build the companies around them and the teams and get them financing and so on. And I'm also a business advisor for small business owners. I coach small business owners on strategic goals, particularly families and partners who are trying to come to a common understanding of their strategic objectives.
Good afternoon. My name is Marquita Barbieri. I'm a partner at a law firm called Carmody McDonald. I've been practicing for about 15 years, and similar to Brian and Tim, who you hear from next, I practice in the general corporate business law area, do a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and represent a lot of CEOs and business teams to strategize on day-to-day operations as well as long-term goals that they might have.
Hello, I'm Tim McFadden. I am a partner at the law firm of Posenelli here in town, and I have been working with early stage companies since the early to mid 1990s. So I've got a client base that consists of everything from brand new startup all the way through companies that are doing exits at this point. I do a lot of venture capital work as well.
Okay, great. So Tim's going to lead off by talking about the legal formation of a company. So glad you've got the mic in your hand. Take it away, Tim.
Yeah, and I think our assumption here today is that a lot of the people in this room are prospective entrepreneurs or maybe people who've just started their business. So they're, we're kind of going back to what are the very first kind of things you have to think about. So when I think about, the formation of an entity, I think what you have to think about when you're going to start your business is you want to mitigate your risk. So one of the key ways that you can, reduce your risk is to create a legal entity so that you're not personally liable for, the obligations of your company. So, if you just do business as a sole proprietorship or as a general partnership, then you've got personal risk on the line. So when we advise clients to set up an entity. And then the question is, what entity should you set up? And so we think that a couple different factors kind of drive that decision making. One factor would be, what are the tax implications in the early years of the entity? Another implication, and I think a very important implication, is what type of entity do you want to be when you eventually exit the business and you sell it for hopefully a big number? Then, of course, another key consideration is how much does it cost to set up an entity? So the three types of entities that we typically discuss with clients are either be an LLC or an S corporation or a C corporation. And Marquita, do you want to comment on those three?
Are you going to do your overview first, or do you want me to pipe in on one or two?
I can do a quick overview. So on the a long time ago, we would see a lot of people set up as S corporations, which are great. They're tax flow-through entities. The one negative with an S corporation is that they usually only allow, they only allow one class of stock in most situations, and you can only have a certain number and a certain type of shareholder. So they're not great for institutional funding rounds. And then there are C corporations, which are kind of coming back into vogue due to a new Internal Revenue Code provision called 1202. So we're seeing more of those. You always see those at the institutional round, but we're starting to see those in the early stage rounds.
Everybody's clear that institutional round means like with a venture capital investor or a professional investor of some kind, okay?
Yeah, correct. Sorry about that. So a 1202 has to do, it's called small business investment stock, I think it is. I can't remember the exact name of it right now, but essentially what it provides is that if you satisfy certain requirements, then when you go to exit the business, if you do a stock sale, you don't pay any capital gains tax at all. So it's not a reduced rate, it's no capital gains tax up to the greater of $10 million or 10 times your tax basis. So we're starting to see some investors want to form a C Corp just because of that 1202 issue. But again, you have to think you're going to own it for 5 years, et cetera. And then the one that we've been seeing the most, I was here the last 4 or 5 years, before this 1202 issue came along, was LLCs. And we really like them because they're very flexible. They can be more expensive to set up because you have to do an operating agreement, but I think firms have gotten pretty fast at that. But they're very flexible entities. You can always convert them to a C Corp with, without any negative tax implications, so.
Or an S corp.
Yeah,
I mean, you can be taxed as a C corporation.
right, yeah.
Okay, so everybody's clear then that the C Corp is the one that, that's the one, that entity has to pay corporate income tax, and therefore, then if it distributes earnings to its shareholders, the shareholders also have to pay income tax. So that's the one that has double taxation, and both the S Corp and the LLC avoid that particular wrinkle. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, yep, absolutely.
Okay, so that's the difference. So basically, if you want to avoid the double taxation issue, go with an LLC or an S Corp. But actually, for professional investors, for a whole host of reasons that are too complicated to go in here, just trust me, they need to see a C Corp, by and large. So
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah.
One thing I'd like to say about entities' choice as far as taxation is LLCs can actually choose how they're taxed. So the default for a single member LLC is that it's disregarded altogether for tax purposes, just like you're a sole proprietor. And the default for for multi-member LLCs is partnership. But an LLC can choose to be taxed as a C corporation or as an S corporation. So it really does have a lot of flexibility. And I agree with Tim that, most of the entities that I set up these days are definitely going to be LLCs.
Yeah, one negative with the C Corp too is in the early years, the losses get trapped at the corporate level. So if your business isn't making money the first few years, you can't take those losses. If you're a C Corp, they're trapped at the company level. So that's something else that can influence thinking, so.
And just to add on to that even further, while many investors, Harry included, will encourage a startup to start out of the gate as a C Corp, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like Tim said, there's some issues on the loss side at the early stages. But you can also probably convert your limited liability company into a Delaware C Corp in the future. Yes, there's a cost associated with that. But to avoid some of the early costs of the C corporation, it still might be a cost-benefit analysis that is worth doing. We also see a lot of early-stage companies form a C corp, and it's fun to say, there's 12 million shares issued for my company. It's awesome, I love it. But that also means that you'll get a franchise tax bill from the state of Delaware or the state of Illinois or wherever your fine state might be, not Missouri. There's still franchise taxes, but they do it differently. And you'll get a bill for $143,000. You will freak out and you will call us. If you hadn't called us before, you will now. There would be ways that you would amend your articles of incorporation to adjust that so that you're not paying that franchise tax, but there's just an awareness there of, you know, how the cool factor looks and how fast you think you're going to raise money versus the startup costs that if you are a single member limited liability company, like Brian said, if it's just you, that tax situation passes through to you, easy peasy, we all kind of like that. The startup costs for that are also really reasonable. Most firms have a flat fee or a set fee for a single member limited liability company because that's not a complicated operating agreement. You're the owner, you're the manager, you're running the show. When you expand into a multiple member limited liability company, that's where the cost comes in that Tim's talking about, where you do have to talk about buying and selling your interest. What happens if one of you die? What happens if one of you gets divorced? What happens if one of you becomes disabled? We become the Grim Reapers and talk to you about those scenarios so that you plan, well, everybody's friends, or if there's a change down the line. So that's where your cost comes in. And you'll have that cost in a corporation as well because you'll enter into a shareholder or buy-sell agreement.
Okay, so this is a complicated area, and there are going to be a lot of questions. Let's hold those questions until we cover just two other issues having to do with localities and governance. So, Marquita, since you've got the mic, why don't you go ahead?
Sure thing. So again, some investors will tell you they love Delaware. That's great. We like Delaware too. I actually lived in Delaware. There's not a lot there besides the fine Secretary of State of Delaware that's collecting all these fees that we just mentioned. But many investors feel that they know Delaware law. There's been some great marketing that Delaware has done to say that this is the state that investors are comfortable with. If you're here based in Missouri, the Missouri laws for corporations, in my opinion, I can have my friends and counterparts here correct me if they feel differently. Missouri laws are also really beneficial for corporations and companies in general. Sometimes I think they're actually better than Delaware's laws. So you're perfectly fine sort of beginning your company in Missouri. The costs are low. There's not those annual taxes that Delaware has. They also have them for LLCs in Delaware. And if you form your company in Delaware, or any other state for that matter, what's really easy to do, and we wanted to make a point of it during this presentation, because today there's so much less brick and mortar, if you don't actually live in Delaware, and you really live in Missouri, or whatever other state you need to be operating in, you probably need to register your business not only to do business in the state in which it incorporated or was organized, but in the state in which you are physically located. So wherever your humans are, your business likely has to register to do business in that state as well. So let's pretend you organize your limited liability company here in Missouri, but you live in Illinois. You're going to be living and working out of your home office in Illinois. You need to register that limited liability company in Illinois, and you might as well just do that unless you have a good reason to form it here in Missouri. It's more expensive to form it in Illinois, and there's annual fees there, but you have to do it. The states aren't going to let you off if you are really doing business there. They want to collect their sales taxes from you as well if you physically have operations or a human being doing business there. So as you expand, these are the points where we want you to reach out to your attorney and say, hey, I'm about to expand my business to Arizona. What do I need to do? Are you going to have a person there in Arizona? Yeah, Susie Bell's going to be there working out of her house. We still need to register to do business in Arizona.
Okay, so basic point there, there's a state in which you incorporate, then any state that you do business in, you also have to, register your business there. And typically, I think you register as a foreign corporation. I know that sounds weird, but they mean foreign to that state, right?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, super. So I'm going to then turn it over to Brian for a little quick discussion of governance.
Oh, I'd also say a third point in summarizing Marquita is that Missouri rules, so it's awesome. Especially for LLCs, it's the filing fee if you file online is $50. They don't require annual reports. It's really easy. Helps keep you from running afoul of something called the piercing the corporate veil, where you could lose your limited liability if you don't treat your company as a company and follow the various governance things that are required. So, and now, I get the honor of introducing the most exciting topic of the afternoon, which is governance. So I'll talk about the different kinds of players in corporations and LLCs and kind of what their authority is. So I'll start with corporations. They're a little bit more straightforward, and the players are pretty set by corporate law. So you've got shareholders, you've got directors, the board of directors, and then you have officers. And I think of them as kind of an upside-down pyramid. Often you have more shareholders than you have directors, and you have more directors than officers. And the ultimate authority actually starts at the top also, in that shareholders, subject to a shareholder agreement, can oust the directors and by implication the officers also. So shareholders have that kind of voting authority. They elect the board of directors, but the board of directors is really, that's where the heart of the power is as far as governance goes in a corporation. They set policy, the board of directors appoints the officers, and they make the policy making decisions that are important to the company. They're the group that has that responsibility. So, and then the officers are the ones that actually have executive authority. They can bind the company. Generally speaking, nobody has authority to sign, for instance, a corporation's contracts except its officers. A director doesn't, a shareholder doesn't, a founder doesn't, an owner doesn't. It's the president or vice president or some other officer. So the heart of authority is the board. The people who actually carry out the company's activities are the officers, and then the people with the ultimate say on things are the shareholders as a whole. So those are corporations. LLCs, which I'm very much in love with myself. They're my favorite entity. They're very flexible and cost effective, although I completely agree with Harry. In some cases, they're not the best choice. There's two flavors of LLCs. There's manager-managed LLCs and member-managed LLCs. And what the difference is who has authority to make decisions on behalf of the company and who has the executive authority. So and the authority that I'm talking about is basically if you take the board of directors of a corporation and the officers of a corporation and put them in one group or one person, those are the managers, those are the members. So they have policy-making authority as well as executive authority. And then, so depending on which flavor you choose when you organize your company, and that's a decision that you have to make from day one, is are you going to be manager-managed or member-managed? Depending on which flavor you are, the manager or managers will be the ones that set policy and make the important decisions, and they'll also be the ones that sign contracts and legal documents. If you're member-managed, the members have that authority. Whether you're member-managed or manager-managed, the members still generally have the ultimate authority that shareholders have. So, and then one last thing, I can see Marquita's ready to roll here. One last thing is that many LLCs are set up by their operating agreement to operate a lot like corporations as far as their governance structure. They'll have a board of managers that functions a lot like a board of directors. They'll have officers that are elected similar to the officers of a corporation. So it has a look and feel of a corporation, although that's not necessary as it is in a corporation. So that's all I have to say.
Marquita, you have a quick one?
I promised I wasn't going to totally jump in. I wanted to give a preference, and in my view, a best practice, and also just to, Brian covered everything that you need to know, but owners are members. So those are synonymous terms in case anybody gets confused on who's running the show. I'm also in favor of most LLCs being structured as manager-managed. Like Brian said, there's nothing wrong with member-managed, but let's pretend you do add in several members over the course of time. There's a body of laws called agency laws. And if all of the owners have the right to go out and sign documents and sign papers for the company and contracts and sign up a new vendor, whether it's ordering pencils or something more extravagant, what you may not want to do is have all the owners running around with the same authority to sign all the documents. It doesn't mean they lose voting power like Brian just described at the end of the day for big decisions, but I assume that you're all going to end up on a yacht somewhere. Please don't forget your lawyers. But what's great about manager-managed too is that you don't necessarily have to be an owner to be a manager. So at some point when you guys are making your millions, you can appoint Joe Bob to be your manager, and you can go to the Caribbean and say, call me when there's a big vote to happen when I'm on my exit. So it's a great flexibility when you choose manager-managed. So if you're forming your company yourself or talking to your lawyer, again, it's a conversation like Brian said that you'll have, but I'll throw out my flag for manager-managed.
Two things real quick. One is when you form an entity, you have to sign on behalf of the entity. I know a lot of times when people start companies, they don't understand how to sign, so you put your company name at the top, and then you have a by, you sign your name, and then it's whatever your office or position is. And then the other thing I would try to steer away from is try not to create an entity where it's owned 50-50 or where you have an even number of directors or managers, because a lot of times that can get really sticky and become a big problem down the road. So, I would really try to avoid that and try to have an odd number of directors or managers and then have, not a 50-50 ownership if you can avoid it.
And I would caution you about the member-managed. It can get really cumbersome. As a former banker, I can tell you, trying to find all the members to sign every loan agreement can be a real challenge. You're much better off if you've designated that authority to one or two people rather than having the whole crowd involved.
Okay, great. So we've covered a lot of ground. Obviously, this is something people go to law school for years to learn. We're not going to cover it in any depth here, but I do want to open it up for questions for just a few minutes. So I know you had a question before? No? We answered it? Yes.
So you start a new entity, and down the road you need funding. You sell part of it off, and down the road you need more funding. I hear about A, B, C, D rounds. How do you do that without diluting totally down to nothing?
Well, you do dilute.
Give up on the idea of not diluting. Forget it.
You
Forget
just need to
about
get
not
comfortable with the idea that you're going to have dilution and need to manage it. That's just a reality.
How did Gates retain 50% of Microsoft? How do these guys go through all these rounds?
Well, that's why you'll see sometimes.
He managed it well.
Well, and sometimes you'll see now, like I think what they did with Facebook was, didn't Zuckerberg, he created a new class of non-voting stock. And so when they were issuing stock, they were issuing non-voting shares, so he kept the voting stock. So that would be one way you could try to do that. And kind of a rule of thumb that I've heard, I think is fairly accurate, is usually for each very significant capital round that you go through, you give up about a third of the company. It's kind of a rule of thumb. But there are different things you can do. So you can create non-voting stock versus voting stock, and that way you can keep voting control. So there are different things you can do.
So
In
when
the-
you start your corporation, do you have to somehow define that early on, or can that be changed down the road?
It can be changed.
Yeah, that can be changed.
It can be changed. I think what sometimes we see, especially in limited liability companies and sometimes in corporations, when you have the voting stock and non-voting stock, and then you've probably heard in limited liability companies, you can have Class A, Class B, Class C. There's profits, interests. We can talk more about those if we have time. But what we do see and what we caution against is that because startups are sometimes cash poor, there's a little bit of an instant feeling to just give away ownership to people who are willing to jump in the hot seat with you. We do caution or think very carefully about that with our business owners because, how did Bill Gates keep 50%? Well, he wasn't handing it out like candy to everybody who was helping him, build something, for your developers, your app developers, your web developers. You don't just hand out equity or profits interest to continue to dilute the company. But we also don't want you to be afraid of diluting your company. Dilution, natural dilution is good. You'd rather have 30% of a $10 billion company than 100% of a $100,000 company. So it's just an analysis of who you're really giving that ownership to, what you're getting in return, or whether you're just handing it out early stage because you're cash poor and you can't pay a salary.
There's a concept that's very mathematical concept that's very easy in concept but hard to actually do this. But if you do that, then dilution you'll be able to keep it under control. And that is the ratio of the money that you need should be very small compared to the value of your company. So if you can manage that ratio and grow the company as you raise money, then your dilution will be a lot less.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think the one thing to bear in mind is the golden rule, which is that he who has the gold makes the rules. So we talked just a second ago about, voting stock, and you can say, well, we're going to issue stock generally to people, but only these people can vote. Well, investors will come in and they'll say, well, if you want our money, we're getting voting stock. And as a matter of fact, there are a whole bunch of decisions that we're not going to allow you to make. They can only be made with majority approval of that particular round of stock. So, this is something that just has to be managed on a round-to-round basis. And so in case it's not obvious, I think we've tried to make it clear that this is a very difficult area. And I think the point I'd like to leave the whole room with is that, unless you're a lawyer yourself and specifically a transactions attorney, I wouldn't try to do this on your own. I think you really, we joke a lot about, there's too many lawyers in the room and, all the lawyers want this and the lawyers want that. The reality is that, you want to find a lawyer that you feel really comfortable with and who makes you, confident that they know what they're doing. And then you want to listen to that person and, proceed very carefully, ask questions. Don't proceed until all your questions are answered, but don't try to do it on your own. That's why you need an advisor. Yeah, question over here.
Time for a mic drop.
Question.
Yeah, in relation to what you just said, that was my question. How can you choose the right law firm to work with? Because you have the large law firms that actually charge a higher fee.
Well, these people in the room here are all worth every penny you pay, I guarantee you.
Thank you, Bob.
That's part of my presentation. It is to talk about people and how you're gonna choose the right person. I'm gonna talk about
Yeah,
that.
it's a great question, and we are gonna cover that because it's really important. Thank you for asking that. Question over here.
Doesn't help going from an LLC to a C Corp?
To go from an LLC to a C Corp, I think you just file a conversion document, and you go from the LLC to the C Corp. State by state thing, but you're going to have to, redo your formation documents to reflect your capital structure.
I've done it twice in the last 6 months. It takes some effort. The lawyers made a significant amount of money, but it wasn't hard to make it happen because we had the right attorney. Yeah.
I think one really important concept in all this stuff is that, there's no right answer for all these questions. It's really kind of on a case-by-case basis. So what I mean by that is, I think you really have to sit down and you really have to think through, what type of business am I trying to create? Am I going to have to raise additional capital down the road or not? Can I bootstrap it or not? And then I think as you start to answer those questions, all of a sudden the structure and how you should form things and how big your board should be and should you have more than one class of stock, I think all those things become pretty clear. But I really think that the most important thing is, at first, is just kind of understand what type of business you're trying to create, and are you going to have to raise capital down the road? Are you going to have to get a lot more people involved or not? And then I think the decisions kind of fall into place.
Our keynote speakers earlier this afternoon, Steve Stenger and Mr. Saunders, both talked about starting a business on their own as a professional consulting firm, a law firm, whatever. If you can do it with your own money, you're in control 100%. But if you're going to need $20 million for cancer research, it's unlikely you're going to fund that out of your own pocket, and you're going to have to plan for how you're going to raise that money and where you're going to spend it.
Right. Okay, we'll take one more question.
Hopefully quickly. Mitigating risk, not on the money side. What should you be thinking about to mitigate risk? You got a product you're selling, someone's going to eventually sue you for something related to creating or the use of that product. You can go in with an LLC approach. In the case of you're making little screwdrivers or whatever, it's maybe just a single member. What else should you be considering to protect your family from the impact of that?
Well, here's the beauty of all the structures that we just taught you about. They're all the same from a liability perspective, okay? So the C corporation shield is sufficient to protect your family. The S corporation shield is sufficient to protect your family. And the limited liability company owned by yourself or owned with multiple people is sufficient to protect all families involved. The only caveat to that is whether you really do something horrible, like commit fraud, like intermingle your funds. So Brian alluded earlier to that pierce the corporate veil structure or event that could happen. It takes a lot to pierce the corporate veil. We're giving you those tips on how you sign documents. It should be in the name of your company by Bob, the manager. Those are good practices. We teach you those practices so that you're really keeping company checks and company letterhead with company business activities. But truly to pierce the corporate veil takes some serious fraud. They're hard to prove, but you've really got to blow it. You've really got to be doing something illegal to mess that up. So the liability structure should stand in all of these instances to protect you and your families.
One caveat there, if you're providing a professional service, if you're a CPA providing a service to people, you're not protected from personal negligence, gross negligence, just because you have a corporate entity.
I've done pretty extensive research in Missouri as far as reading the cases, dealing with LLCs and corporations and piercing the corporate veil. And Missouri just really doesn't distinguish between the two. So, I mean, as Marquita said, LLC is going to be just as good as a corporation as far as that goes.
And you just have to be compliant with the rules of do what your lawyer tells you to maintain,
Right.
the corporation in good standing, and you'll be fine.
Right. And
You also should look at insurance. I mean, a lot of the risks that businesses, are exposed to in the day-to-day operation of your business, whether it's slip and fall or product liability, even professional negligence, you can mitigate through insurance. So, and if I can give a quick ad, there's what I think is a really good article about appropriately signing documents and making sure the right people are doing it. If you Google how to sign a contract, someone who blogs under the contracts guy name wrote that, and anyway,
That'd be Brian.
I read that last
pretty
week.
easy to
It's a good
find.
article.
All right, we're going to move
Terry,
on.
do you mind if I say one thing that was
Not at all.
complimentary to what you had said about lawyers? So I'm going to hold on to that. We're here today to show you, and Harry said it really well, which is use a business lawyer who has seen a lot. We've seen a lot of structures. We see them on a case-by-case basis. Treat your business lawyer as kind of two for the price of one. We're business consultants to some extent and business lawyers. Like we've seen so many structures, we've seen so many good things or bad things or whatever it is happen. We can guide you to the right people for insurance or other business coaching or whatever else it might be that you need. We interact with those vendors, CPAs, whatever it might be, to make your whole business cohesive and help you find good partners. So part of leveraging your lawyer relationship is not freaking out when you pick up the phone and say, oh my God, they're going to start writing down that time. We really care about the relationship. We care about your business. We know it's your livelihood, and we want to make that work for the long run. So make that relationship with your lawyers. They're there to kind of guide you through these things and leverage those things that we've already seen go wrong for so many other people.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to team building now. So, and Bob, why don't you take it away?
Okay, So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about people and teams and relationships. But first, I want to make a point that as an entrepreneur starting a business, you're likely the chief executive, which means you're the chief of everything. You're in charge, okay? A lot of entrepreneurs think about their product or they think about selling something, but you're responsible for everything. Human resources, accounting, finance, insurance, all of it. Make sure it all gets handled. Whether you do it yourself or you hire somebody to do it, don't ignore it simply because you're busy or because you don't know how to do insurance. You've got to find people to help you do those things. Sometimes it's easier to do it yourself, but really hiring people is going to get a lot more done, and you can only do so much. There's only 24 hours in a day. You really got to have some help. Now, as far as advisors, whether they're on your board or whether they're paid professional advisors or whether they're mentors or whatever, what you're looking for is people who are going to coach you and help you with the strategic things that you need to do. And to the question earlier about who do you choose, start before you've got the business developing relationships, exploring relationships with people. If you're pretty sure you're going to need an attorney to help you get through intellectual property, for example, because you have invented something and you want to protect it, talk to several way before you need them. This is not like buying a car and you can go out and hit 3 showrooms and pick a car by the end of the day. If you think that you're going to need somebody to help you file an FDA application for approval for a medical device, and you're going to need that person a year from now, you should be talking to them today. If you think you're going to need a banker to borrow money from them in 2 years, you should be meeting bankers today, getting to know people. Develop those relationships way ahead of when you need them. And that, by having those relationships, by getting to know people, by talking to them for a period of time, you get to get comfortable with people, and you sit down with all 3 of these guys and pick the one that's going to suit you best. It really is about the people. You've got to have the technical skill. They've got to have the law degree. They have to have the background, the knowledge. You don't want a surgeon doing heart surgery on you who hasn't done 100 operations. You don't want an attorney doing intellectual property for your business who hasn't done 100 of them before. Let the newbie learn working under the experienced person. Also, when you do hire people, whether it's an outside advisor or whatever, remember that delegate doesn't mean send and forget. You have to follow up. You have to have reports. You've got to it's up to you. It's your responsibility. If you go back to your board 6 months from now and say, Brian didn't do it, I'm sorry, they're going to say, well, next time you make sure. And if you go back to them a second time and say, sorry, somebody didn't follow, they're going to look for a new CEO. It's your responsibility. You're in charge. So who has the right answers? That's the real challenge. You've got to, as badly as you need equity to keep this business going, you've got to find people who have your best interest at heart, and that's why you've got to start building those relationships early on. There are lots of people out there who are experts on one thing or another. The problem is that to the guy who has a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, maybe you need a screwdriver, but the problem is the guy who has a hammer doesn't know that, and he can't tell you that. So you need to talk to advisors who have a broader experience. You need to find people who are going to figure out what you need, help you evaluate the alternatives, look at what are the choices for you. They're not just going to say, I got the best tool in the toolbox, here's the answer for you. They're going to help you evaluate your choices, what fits for you, what are the alternatives, how might the different choices that are facing you impact you, what might the results be long-term down the road. And then ultimately you just have to decide who to trust, okay?
I want to, that was a really important word there, and just share a quick story. I got my MBA from the Wharton School deep in the last century. And when I showed up for my first day of classes, our management professor just said, well, who here can tell me what the most important component of any business is? And people said, capital. Those were the finance people. And people said, our manufacturing capability. And he goes, no. The most important thing in business is trust. This is actually a critical point. The whole system is set up so that people can trust each other within limits. And it's really, really crucial that you think about that deeply. Look at every negotiation as a chance to develop trust. Look at every interview that you do with somebody as a chance to develop trust. If you really come to trust the people you're working with, I guarantee it's going to go a lot better.
So you're going to have advisors, but ultimately you're the executive. You have to execute. You have to make a decision. You have to act. You're looking at the advisors to coach you, mentor you, help you learn what the options are and how to do it. One thing you do is get the advisors together. Don't listen to one person and then go talk to somebody else separately. Build a team of advisors, whether it's a formal board or an advisory board. That all depends on the nature of your company, what you're doing. But don't listen to your people in a vacuum. Get people together and hear their different perspectives, and then you have to make a decision. One last thing that they asked me to put on the list here to talk about is the contractor versus employee issue, and that's a legal tax prospect. Hiring an employee seems like an easy thing to do because you have absolute and complete control over them. You can tell them when to show up to work and what to do and so on. Don't have an independent contractor and try to do that. If you hire somebody and treat them as an independent contractor and then treat them as an employee, it's going to cost you about 50% when it's all over and said with. So we've got lots more we could talk to you about, but we only have a limited amount of time, so I'll leave it at that, and we'll be here to talk to you later if you have more questions.
So let's open it up for questions now about team building. I know that it's a very complicated subject. We've only been able to touch on it, but let me just open it up and ask anybody here for questions. Yeah.
You guys are great, and you're sitting on the panel as the attorneys, and you're saying, come to us, talk to us. And I'm an attorney myself, and I know that accessibility can be an issue with people that are just starting out in business. And I'm sure we would all say, don't go and fill it out yourself. We want advisor. Can you guys talk about some resources in the St. Louis community for people that are just starting out to have the accessibility to legal advice? They can't come and pay the high billable hours.
Well, so thank you. That's a perfect segue into the program that I run. So I run a coaching and resources program, and for people in the life sciences, BioSTL Fundamentals is a great place to go and learn about the basics of business. And then we introduce people to people in our network. Lawyers are some of those people, but patent attorneys, various other different kinds of people. So that's one kind of resource that's available for people that are trying to start a company in the life sciences area. Then there's I-10, also has, for people in the information space, that's a good place to go. For people in agriculture, there's Yield Labs. So there's quite a few resources here in St. Louis. I think also then there are legal clinics that are operated out of the universities for sure. And so I know that both SLU and WashU have those. I'm not sure about UMSL. Anybody know about that? No. So WashU and SLU have legal clinics. And then there's a sector map. There's actually a map that lists all the resources in St. Louis, and that's available through.
It's in that book that was passed out today, the I-10 pamphlet.
Yeah, there's a blue book at the front if you didn't.
Yeah, there's a
Not our book, there's a separate.
there's a centerfold in there.
There you go,
that-
John, would you hold
Yeah.
that up, just kind of wave it to everybody?
Yeah. There's a centerfold in there that has a map of literally dozens of organizations in St. Louis that.
Yeah,
Right.
it's very unusual in my experience that a community offers as much as St. Louis does, especially for a community of this size in terms of resources. So you're in a great place for entrepreneurship from that point of view. Great question. Thank you.
All right,
Just,
one
can
more,
I,
that's it.
can I just do one more corollary to your response? Not that we are the ones who end up taking all your money in a sense, but I don't advocate LegalZoom and some of the online resources. Most of the law firms here have programs that are also offering either free legal services. I offer a startup fee chart and rates. A lot of firms have those for their startup companies and emerging businesses, so ask for them. Even if you work with a large firm, again, sort of don't be deterred by just the dollar amount rate of Tim's rate as a senior attorney. There's programs in place within law firms that are accounting for emerging businesses, because we of course want new businesses as well as more mature businesses. So do watch out for LegalZoom. Like if you want to do a trademark and things like that, I've just got so many stories of people who registered their trademark on LegalZoom and then really regretted it later and had to spend more legal fees. So
I'll be happy to share a LegalZoom horror story of my own, so.
you do get what you pay
that's true.
for.
All right, we have time, we really need to break one more quick question.
What's your suggestion for advisors, like how to financially how to pay them? Like a small LLC company may need advisors in like 5 different areas, and what's your suggested way of paying?
I mean,
Cash.
Credit card.
I mean, again, I would go back to all the different organizations in town. Like if you work with I-10, I think maybe one of the life science organizations has it too, where they've got what are called EIRs, which are entrepreneurs in residence, and those are seasoned business executives who are actually being paid by I-10 in that case to actually do work with a number of different companies. And the EIR's goal is to eventually, well, it's to work with like 5 or 6 or 7 companies at a time, and then eventually find a company that they end up joining full-time. But I really think if you go and you network at like Venture Cafe, you can find a lot of different opportunities. Like I know our firm, for example, we do a lot of in-kind services in connection with all the different programs. So like if you're an Arch Grant winner, if you're a Capital Innovator company, if you're a Prosper company, we offer in-kind services up to $5,000 to $10,000 in free services for a lot of companies.
Another organization to look at is SCORE. It's a government agency, but the services are free. So there's lots of resources out there. There are literally dozens of organizations. You just have to do some exploring.
Just to make sure we answered the question, though, so generally speaking, attorneys, accountants, et cetera, do need to be paid with cash. It's not a good idea to pay them with equity. And then other advisors, technical advisors, medical advisors, that kind of thing, very small pieces of equity, 0.5%, something like that, is a really good way to get advice for your company early on. And that's pretty much the going rate, by the way.
All right, we got time for one more question right here.
A bigger pardon?
Get a legal agreement in place with your advisor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you want legal agreements with everybody you do business with.
Okay, one more question, you.
Well, I was just gonna ask, I know, I've been a part of the St. Louis entrepreneurial community for a while. My business is about 4.5 years old, so I'm a little bit into this. I'm actually consumer products in the natural foods. And so in St. Louis, we've got all these great resources for tech companies and, life sciences and all this stuff. Not a whole lot of natural food type of stuff. And I'm sure that not just with me, but there's other businesses that are unique. So any advice for people like that finding resources? Because it's almost like you're looking a little bit more like for a needle in a haystack.
I think you are looking for a little bit more of a needle in a haystack, but not necessarily. There's a lot of people here in this town who have left Monsanto, DuPont, Soleil, who are starting their own businesses. Luis Ribeiro down at Venture Cafe, he's doing the same thing. I'm an ex-DuPonter, so you just need to find people who are in the health and nutrition space. Tamara Keefe with Clementine's Ice Creamery, all natural. I mean, you just got to find people who are in those businesses and call them and say, who do you work with?
Good answer. Okay, thanks, everybody. I think the idea now is to, go ahead if you have.
Okay, please remember to fill out the survey. If you didn't get one, hopefully you did. You know what, I think they didn't bring them down here, but
No, they
please
did.
remember, do we have them?
Tom's like our Grim Reaper. I also wanted, while you guys are passing those out, I wanted to say one
surveys are up there, the
point
form.
on that advisory board question. You can have and then there were good things, yes, an advisory board maybe needs a little stipend here and there. But for advisors who are not your service providers, your accountants, your lawyers, to Harry's distinction, networking, like Tim said, finding people passionate about your project, your industry. Many people, when you're not taking a huge time suck from them early on, are happy to be named if they're relevant in your industry. Maybe they have a name that's of credibility to you that's helpful. Maybe you can do quarterly calls with those folks and just get their input. So it's people who are passionate about your cause. They might be friends or you might be reaching out, but they may not always need a stipend right off the bat.
One thing I wanted to finish with too that I thought of a few different times in this discussion is when you're talking about giving away equity, you should never ever just give away equity. You should probably always put in place some kind of deferred compensation agreement where you say to somebody, okay, you're saying you're going to do X and I'm going to give you 1% of the company. So I'm only going to give you the 1% when you've done X. Because I've had so many business owners who've given away equity early based on promises that people were going to do things, and then they don't do anything, and then they're stuck with them as owners. So I would always do it, through either some type of option or a warrant or something like that, where they don't actually, it doesn't actually vest unless they perform. I think
Great
that's really
point.
important.
And you can't get rid of them. They're then usually your worst people to be on your company.
Yeah.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you, everybody. We're available for one-on-one questions now, so thank you, panel. Terrific job, and thank you, everybody, for coming.
All right.